Support for Trifles comes from listeners like you, who support us through Patreon and Substack. Bonus material, thank you gifts, and more await at patreon.com/trifles and at trifles.substack.com. And now you can enjoy some Trifles swag, mugs, notepads, and oval stickers. Available in our store. Find it at ihearofsherlock.com/merchandise.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the box was cardboard, the detective was dying, and the bridge was Thor, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
Have you ever stopped to wonder why James Phillimore disappeared looking for his umbrella? Or just how parsley can manage to sink into the butter?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Bert Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 482, Fingerprints. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the podcast where we get into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
And Bert, have you been photographed and printed before entering the studio?
I have been photographed and printed. Unfortunately, they needed a new cartridge in the printer. So from the nose up, it's all sort of wavy and gray. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's how I look. Oh, forget I said anything.
Well, the gray, yeah, but the wavy, you might want to get your eyes checked.
Yeah, I might. Well, as soon as they settle down, I will.
Get some eye prints. Get a retinal scan.
A retinal scan. What a great idea.
Yeah. Well, a great idea is this episode, which was prompted to us by Kai Johansson. Kai wrote into us at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com, which anyone can do if you'd like to suggest a topic. Amazingly, in nearly 500 episodes, we have not covered the forensics of fingerprints and the appropriate use of them in the Sherlock Holmes stories. Now, there's not as much to go on as we thought, but this is Trifles. We will make a mountain out of a molehill, as we have been known to do. So stick with us to see what we're going to say about fingerprints and how they came into standard police practice in Victorian times. Meanwhile, we would direct your attention to SherlockHolmesPodcast.com, where you can find all of the show notes. You can sign up for email updates there. And to Patreon and Substack, where you can support the show. For as little as $1 a month, you can add your part to the Sherlockian world by funding the show. Your contributions help us to do the research, to buy prizes, to pay for the hosting costs, everything that goes into producing a quality show. And this one too, to make it absolutely entertaining for you and to keep you on the edge of your seats. So if you wouldn't mind, go over to Patreon and to Substack. The links are in the show notes, and you can find whatever you like to support there. And while you're browsing around in our show notes, check out our merch as well. We have Trifles mugs and notepads, among other things. We'd be delighted to have your support through our merch store. Thank you. Well, Bert, I know I'm going to find your mitts all over this show. Fingerprints. Now, you and I were having a discussion before we started recording here, looking for mentions of fingerprints in the Sherlock Holmes stories. What was your experience?
Well, I bet my experience was probably a lot like yours. that comb the canon deeply as you can, word for word. Those letters, fingerprints, do not appear in the canon. Not finger-print, not fingerprint, but other variations of that do appear. And, of course, there's one famous one and one that we tumbled on ourselves.
Yeah, I was really astounded, when Kai said, hey, have you talked about fingerprints? And I thought, well, surely we must have talked about fingerprints. A search in our own spreadsheet, our own database, found nothing. And then a search in the canon itself found nothing. And I thought, well, this can't be the case. Because as we all know, Sherlock Holmes was something of a barometer of forensic science, either helping to lead developments in forensic science or to reflect the reality of what was happening in the police world at the time. Almost a chronicling of the evolution of forensic science. So to me, it seemed rather odd. And even though in all of his monographs, I thought, well, surely he's written a monograph about fingerprints. Nope. Nothing to be had. Footmarks, certainly footprints, etc., but no fingerprints. And as you say, there was a single story that immediately popped into our minds. And dear listeners, it should have popped into yours as well. And that is the adventure of the Norwood Builder. Where would we find a fingerprint or a digit print in the Norwood Builder?
Well, on the wall where a red thumb mark appears. It is red, isn't it? But it's not
it's blood, so I would hope it's red.
Yeah, it's blood. Oh, that's right. It's blood. But there's, it's not a fingerprint. It is a thumb mark, right? Isn't that how it's described?
That's exactly right. And it was odd because it was said to have occurred when John Hector McFarlane was getting his hat, I believe. But it seemed like a very unnatural way to to have positioned your thumb while getting your hat. Now look at this, Lestrade said. With dramatic suddenness, he struck a match, and by its light exposed a stain of blood upon the whitewashed wall. As he held the match nearer, I saw it was more than a stain. It was the well-marked print of a thumb. And he said to Holmes, "You are aware that no two thumb marks are alike." And Holmes said, "I have heard something of the kind." Well, then, will you please compare that print with this wax impression of young McFarlane's right thumb, taken by my orders this morning? And lo and behold, the two prints were the same.
Well, of course, Holmes finds that very exciting because he knew that when he looked at that part of the house before, there wasn't any mark there. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the question then became, he said, what a providential thing that this young man should press his right thumb against the wall and taking his hat from the peg. Such a very natural action, too, if you come to think of it. He was laying on the sarcasm quite thick at that point. Yeah. But, of course, the thumb mark was taken because Oldacre had McFarlane place his thumb in sealing wax as part of the legal process for approving his will, rewriting and approving his will. And by virtue of having the print in the sealing wax, it was Oldacre who was able to make a mold of that and then press that mold against the wall, making it seem as if it was, in fact, McFarlane who pressed his thumb into the wall.
Yeah.
Very clever.
Well, kind of. I mean, I wonder how that happened. I wonder if over the years anybody has tried to do that. Because, of course, what you would need to do would be to fill the seal with the impression. With using that really as a mold, you'd need to make a positive out of some flexible material. And then you would dip the positive in some blood and then pop that on the wall. And I wonder how you would do that without melting the ceiling. Well, it's probably, oh no, you can probably do clay. There's probably some clay or ceramic at the time you could have used.
Or I even wonder if you could use candle wax and, put a drop of blood into the sealing wax, right? And the impression made in the sealing wax. Put a drop of blood in there. Get some candle wax on your thumb, a few layers of it, and make sure that the outermost layer is still somewhat molten, and press it down into that wax, that sealing wax, which is much more hard, a much different kind of material than your candle wax.
Oh, right. Well, you've got all the makings of an expert executor of revenge.
I've never been called an old acre. I've been called a wiseacre. That's about it.
Very well done.
Yeah. So as we were looking around, we found an article associated with the Encyclopedia Britannica called Sherlock Holmes, Pioneer in Forensic Science by James O'Brien, written in 2014. He mentions two other stories in which fingerprints are a part. And I really had to do some heavy searching within each of these stories to find them. The first was the Sign of the Four, and the second was the Three Gables.
Yeah. Now, the Three Gables is interesting for an unrelated reason, which we discovered in looking at the text. But basically, what's happening in the Three Gables is that Holmes is speaking to an inspector. And he is a bustling, rubicund inspector who greeted Holmes as an old friend. And the first thing this fellow says to Holmes is, "Oh, Mr. Holmes, no chance for you in this case, I'm afraid. Just a common ordinary burglary and well within the capacity of the poor old police. No experts need apply." And then later on, he says, "In 25 years' experience, I've learned my lesson. There's always the chance of finger marks or something." Well, the interesting thing, beyond the reference to finger marks, not fingerprints, is the name of the inspector.
Yes, it is.
Which is?
Yes.
We never find out.
What?
The unnamed inspector, who was given, I think, the name Tremlett in the Granada production. But in the case of the Three Gables, we never know more than the bustling, rubicund inspector greets Holmes as an old friend. And they have a little dialogue, but Holmes never calls him by a name.
Interesting. I wonder why that is. I wonder if that's an occasion where Conan Doyle was writing and he thought he might insert a name later and simply never got around to it.
I think it's, he's just part of the furniture, the inspector. Probably wasn't worth a name.
Could be.
Yeah.
My goodness. Well, that is certainly a very reasonable supposition in terms of there being finger marks, not fingerprints per se. And then the other, let's see what the other was. Oh, Sign of Four.
Sign of Four. Yeah.
I mentioned. So in this case, I was thinking through it. So Sign of Four. Well, we know that there was the creosote episode, right? And that both Tonga and Jonathan Small managed to find their way through some spilled creosote, thus leaving a trail that Toby could trace. And I thought, well, maybe he was thinking of toe prints. O'Brien was when he mentioned that the prints were here. And I don't know if toe prints were part of the usual forensic study. But no, what he's talking about is they reached a boundary wall as they were making their way out of Pondicherry Lodge. and had to climb a ladder to go over the wall. So Holmes passed Toby over the wall, and then he clambered up the ladder, and he said, "Oh, there's a print of wooden leg's hand on the ladder." Wooden leg, of course, would be Jonathan Small. So he left a handprint on the ladder. Now, there's no telling as to whether that would be detailed enough to get the information one might need from fingerprints and alike, but there we have it. So, at this point, maybe it's helpful for us to look a little bit at the history of fingerprints in forensic science and when Scotland Yard began to effectively use them.
Well, the interesting thing is that if you do some research about this, you find out that fingerprints, the whole idea that ridge patterns in the skin and the fingertips are distinctive goes back a long way. In fact, in Babylon, ancient Babylon, fingerprints were used on clay tablets for business transactions. And then there are things, in before the Common Era in China, there are clay seals bearing these sort of ridge impressions, and then Persia, and then, up through the 17th and 18th century. But what happens is Francis Galton, who was, I think he was a cousin of Darwin, and he was a Victorian scientist, let's say. And he did a variety of things. He coined the term eugenics, and was looking at how do you improve the human population through selective breeding, and we all know what happened to that. And looked at a variety of measurement things. But in 1892, I think, he publishes a book about fingerprints, in which he writes, the palm of the hands and the soles of the feet are covered with two totally distinct classes of marks. The most conspicuous are the creases or folds of the skin, which interest the followers of palmistry. But let no one despise the ridges on account of their smallness, for they are in some respects the most important of all anthropological data. We shall see they form patterns, considerable in size and of a curious variety of shape, whose boundaries can be firmly outlined and which are little worlds in themselves. And this was 1892, and then some 9 years later, Scotland Yard adopts. But the interesting thing is that this was anthropological that he was interested in, and much like Bertillon, because I think Bertillon was also an anthropologist, if I remember.
And he was studying facial expressions, the skull, the shape and size of the skull, etc. So very much in the same lines of that scientific approach. I wanted to predate some goings on before Darwin's cousin, as you say, Sir Francis Galton, wrote that book. In the 1870s, there was a Scottish physician by the name of Henry Folds who was working as a missionary in Japan. And he wrote to Charles Darwin. And he observed that in studying shards of pottery, he noticed a variance in the potter's fingerprints. And he used his colleagues' fingerprints to solve a theft of alcohol from the local hospital. Being a good scientist, he went so far as to scrape off the tips of his fingers to prove that fingerprints did not change when the skin grew back. So maybe that's how Sir Francis Galton got wind of this through Darwin. Maybe Darwin, in conversation, mentioned Folds' discovery over in Japan.
Interesting. Well, what I also found interesting was how quickly this sort of pops up in fiction. And I never would have guessed that it popped up in a major way 2 years after Galton's book in Mark Twain's Pudd'nhead Wilson, which I'd forgotten until we started poking around and doing some research. But Pudd'nhead Wilson, which dates to 1894, what he does, among other things, he's sort of an eccentric character. He's collecting fingerprints as a hobby. And, this sort of features in a major way in the novel Pudd'nhead Wilson. So I was surprised by that.
Yeah.
2 years after Galton.
That's amazing. So it was in 1901 that Scotland Yard first established the Fingerprint Bureau, July 1st, 1901. And its main purpose was to prevent criminals from concealing previous convictions from the police. But fingerprints were soon also used to confirm identity of suspects, of potential criminals from prints that they left at the crime scenes. So, and I think it was in, let me just check the source here. Fingerprint Bureau, found a smudgy, this is in 1905. Thomas and Anne Farrow, an elderly couple, were found bludgeoned to death in their residence above their paint shop. No sign of forced entry, but their cash box was empty, and there was evidence that 2 individuals had been involved in the assault. And this is where the fledgling Fingerprint Bureau came into action. They found a smudgy fingerprint on the underside of the cash tin, and a vagabond identified as Alfred Stratton was recognized as leaving the crime scene, and he and his brother Albert were arrested. The fingerprint on the cash box was identified as belonging to Alfred. The evidence was sorely tested at trial, but in the end, the Stratton brothers were convicted and hanged, the first murderers in the UK to be convicted on fingerprint evidence.
Bum, bum, bum.
That's impressive. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to show our appreciation for our paid supporters, we have a monthly drawing where we put your names into, well, we don't put them anywhere, really. We bring out the big spinning wheel and give it a spin. You see from all the names that are included who we will draw here today. It is number 88. And that looks like it belongs to Ron Forrester. Ron, congratulations. You'll be getting a free back issue of the Baker Street Journal. If you'd like to be like Ron, just go to the link in our show notes at SherlockHolmesPodcast.com or at Patreon or Substack. You can find links to us in the show notes there and support us in any way you choose. Thank you.
Well, throughout the career of Sherlock Holmes, we have many forensic innovations, and many people have written about that over the years. His innovations in science, his pursuit of truth, are all well known. But apparently, when it comes to fingerprints, he left no fingerprints on his cases.
And that is quite a trifle indeed.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Now look at this. A thumb mark.
So I observe.
A thumb mark in blood. You are aware that no 2 thumb marks are alike.
I have heard something of the kind.